Welcome to the Earth Your Wild podcast, brought to you by Reuserbox, providing a better way to buy cardboard boxes. We're your hosts, Jack and Ellie.
This is the podcast where we talk to industry experts and changemakers to try to answer the question, how do we make our businesses better for people and the planet? Today we're joined by Sam Jacobs, co-founder and CEO of GrowRoom. GrowRoom is a sustainable digital marketing agency on a mission to help responsible brands grow online. They work with businesses to tell meaningful stories, create real impact, and provide tools needed to drive system-wide change, all while reducing the environmental footprint of digital activity. GrowRoom is also a proud member of 1% for the Planet, committing at least 1% of their annual turnover to environmental charities each year. Welcome to the podcast, Sam.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I was keen to kick off. I was keen to understand for anyone that's maybe new to GrowRoom or hasn't heard of you guys, can you take us back to the beginning? So, what gaps did you see in the digital agency world that made you think we can do this better?
Yeah, cool. I mean, if I go right back to the start, so GrowRoom was founded by myself and my co-founder, Will, back in 2022. My background is in paid media, in advertising. His background is SEO, organic. And we both have experience working in-house marketing teams as well as for other agencies. And it was kind of around the time of I think it was just after COVID or during that kind of crazy pandemic period of life, where we both found ourselves working in freelance positions in our respective fields. And we'd been kind of referring a few clients back and forth. If I had a PPC client that needed SEO, I'd refer them to him and vice versa. And it just the conversation kind of began from there. And I think initially I pitched the idea to Will that, we're working on a lot of the same clients together. We're doing a lot of work together. Maybe we should join our forces and start an agency. And I think his first reaction was like, hell no. We both come from agency background. We know the ins and outs of that and don't really want to get back into it. But after a bit of kind of conversation and maybe a little bit of convincing, we came to the idea that if we were going to start a digital marketing agency, we didn't want to just start another agency for the sake of it. There's loads of digital marketing agencies out there. There's loads of people who do SEO and PPC. And if we were going to do it, we wanted it to be, we wanted it to mean something. We wanted it to be value driven. We wanted it to kind of represent something more than just having an agency for the sake of it. And that's where I suppose the idea of GrowRoom was formed. And so from the very start, the idea was, we would work with sustainable brands and we would do our own thing to be sustainable. We'd, donate a portion of all revenue to environmental causes. So yeah, that's kind of the roots of the company and where we come from and why it is that we do what we do, but also how we do it.
In your previous life, is it different working with more sort of impact brands or brands that care about their environmental impact?
It's definitely a lot nicer, a lot more rewarding. I think kind of part of the gripe with me and Will with the previous agencies and kind of places that we'd work is quite often you were working for brands that you were they're not, they might be huge organizations, but it's not really very rewarding. You're working for someone who's potentially not doing anything amazingly good for the world. So the difference with what we do is 99% of all the clients that we work with are either kind of sustainably driven in some way. They're either, B Corps, or they're going through the process of becoming a B Corp, or they're just value or, value driven in some way, which makes it a lot more rewarding. It generally means that the people that we're working with are much nicer to work with as well, because they share similar values and aren't just out to make a quick buck. It's more about, giving something back and building business for the sake of good. So yeah, it's definitely kind of worlds apart from the kind of corporate commercial agency lifestyle that we're both used to. But that's why we wanted to do it, right? It's, we wanted it to be more than that, more than just the corporate stuff. So I suppose in ways, yeah, they're worlds apart. But it's the ideal scenario for us because we get to work with nice people who are doing good stuff but in the areas that we specialize in. So it kind of ties everything together really nicely.
Hmm. And so we can maybe paint a bit of a picture for the listener. Is there any brands that anyone that we might have heard of that you're working with,
Um,
or
yes, I'm sure there are. I'm not sure who I can mention on here though, but we work with, I suppose, organizations across the board in terms of size. There are definitely a few that we work with that you will see on the high street, or you will know them um, from online. And that's really, really cool, right? I'm not going to mention the names right now, but it's really, really cool when we get that opportunity to work. And quite often these are brands who are already in the sustainable space, so they're kind of leading the field. We work with a brand who is a responsible. They make responsible skincare. You would
okay,
know who they are if I mentioned them. But they're kind of like leading that space, right? They're kind of doing. They're well known. You'd see them on the high street. They're very, they're big, and to be part of that and to help them improve on the sustainability element and to help them just improve like the online presence overall, knowing the good that they're doing is just fantastic for us. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we get to work with small local businesses who obviously you wouldn't know, who are maybe just like taking their first steps into they've maybe never really considered how their business might affect the environment or what they could do, and then to guide a business like that towards taking those first steps or towards their journey towards sustainability can be really, really fulfilling as well. So yeah, it's interesting getting to work across a really wide spectrum of clients across the board, from kind of the smaller SMEs who are maybe local to us here in Shrewsbury to massive national or international organizations who are kind of already on that journey.
And what inspired you to kind of go down that road yourself, the more sustainable led approach? I saw on your website that you describe you and your co-founder as activists. Do you see yourself as an activist?
Yeah, definitely in certain ways. So I mean, I suppose for me it comes from just a love of the outdoors. I grew up in West Wales in the hills, miles away from anyone else. So my childhood was like very different to I've got a 5-year-old girl. Our childhoods are very different because we live in town now, and I grew up like in the wilderness.
in the wilderness,
um, yeah,
in the
not quite the
mountains?
wilderness, but yeah, in the hills
Yeah,
of
yeah,
West Wales. And so yeah, just kind of I grew up with a love of the outdoors. I spend a lot of time in the mountains in North Wales, Snowdonia. I do a lot of running outside, do a lot of kind of climbing. So my my kind of and this has kind of been my way to combine my work life with my just my hobbies, I suppose. Because if we don't look after the environment and if we're not protecting these wilderness areas, then you know we're not going to have them for much longer. So this is my way to be able to kind of, I suppose, tie all of that in together. And I think like Will's background is very similar, or at least his values are. We both just enjoy the outdoors. We enjoy being active out in the wilderness, and so yeah, it was always like I said before, it was a no brainer from the start, from kind of day one. If we were going to start an agency, it needed to be more than just for the sake of doing it, which is really cool for us. It means we get to um, tie in our outdoor adventure lifestyles and hobbies with work, which is really cool.
How do you balance being a purpose-driven agency while still keeping the commercial side healthy?
That can be a challenge, I suppose. In some ways, like we like to stick to our values, I suppose. We like to stick to our morals, and there's quite often times where we've had to turn away business, right? And we've said, you're either doing something that we can't get behind, or in some way you don't align with our values. A couple of examples there. So we had a vape company approach us one time, like these disposable vapes, and it's like we can't support that. Like that's kind of completely contradictory to what we're trying to promote here. You sell disposable single-use vapes. We had a retailer of gases for forklift trucks. I can't
right.
remember exactly what the product was, but it's kind of like fossil fuel. You're selling like something that is like completely contradictory to the environmental sustainability and progress. And so, from a commercial side of things, I mean, if we had no morals and no values, we'd have grown a lot quicker because we'd have just accepted, business that if we didn't really care. So there's definitely kind of like a fine line or a challenge there when we say no to potentially new business opportunities because they don't align or they don't stick to kind of the values that we uphold. And it definitely makes the commercial side of running a business a lot more challenging. So yeah, it is a balance, and sometimes can be a bit of a challenge.
I know the feeling when
Yeah.
you don't get a job and you're like, oh, maybe we should have just taken
Yeah.
that. It's hard as a small business, right?
Well, you guys are part of 1% for the planet as well. And it sounds, so obviously you give at least 1% of your turnover to environmental charities. So it sounds not a lot, doesn't it? 1% sounds tiny. Like we've had people say to us, oh, it doesn't sound very much. It's a lot, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter if you don't make any profit, it's your turnover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing to remember. It's 1% of revenue, not profit. So this is before any
Mm.
profit is taken out of the company. So and I suppose that's the beautiful thing about 1% for the planet is like this was like one of the first things we did as an organization was like, right, we're going to be 1% for the planet. If we made £1,000, well, it didn't matter. 1% of that was going to go to environmental causes. And I suppose that's the reason it's zero risk. No matter how much money you make, it's only 1%, right? So yeah, it was literally like start the agency day one, day two, become 1% for the planet members, and we've literally been a member of them since. I don't want to say the first day, but like straight away, it was one of the first things that we did. And when you first start, obviously that amount is small. 1% of a small agency is not a huge amount, but 3-4 years down the line, it's quite a substantial amount. And we donate at least 1% to environmental causes. We actually donate more like 3% of all of our revenue at the moment to environmental causes, with a view that will probably become more like 5% over the next couple of years. So I think that's the really good thing about it is you can start small because it's only a percent. There's zero risk. It's only a percentage. So regardless of how much money you're making, how much revenue you're bringing in, it's only 1% of that. But as you grow and as you scale and as your revenue increases, it can actually become something that's quite valuable to the organizations that you support.
You can only donate that amount to charities or organizations that are accredited by them, right? So it's almost like is it like an easy way to find good companies to support? Because obviously there's lots of companies asking for donations out there. It can be a bit of a minefield, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so the 1% thing is you do it through their platform. So yeah, all the organizations that you can donate to are vetted and checked by them. So that they're doing good. And obviously one of the big organizations that we support is the wildlife trusts, like the Shropshire Wildlife Trust, where we do that. We do that outside of 1% for the planet, although because when we first set up they weren't a member, they are now a member, which is really, really cool as well. So there's quite a few organizations that we've helped become so we're like a, I can't remember what the terminology is, we're like a donating partner. So we're partnered with 1% for the planet as a we donate, and then you can become a charity partner as well, so you can then receive the donations, right? And there's been at least 2 or 3 organizations, mostly local to us here in Shropshire, that we've helped them become like charity partners of 1% because they've seen in the local newspaper or whatever that GrowRoom is a 1% for the planet member. And so that's been really cool as well, that we've been able to kind of support other local organizations, charities, become charity partners of 1% as well. So yeah, I think it's really cool. I think, and the thing is, like, anyone can do it, like any business could do it, because again, it's just 1% of your revenue. So like if you're making £100,000 in revenue, or if you're making 10 million in revenue, 1% is only 1%. So more businesses should do that.
And do you notice any other benefits in your company for joining 1% for the planet?
we get we get quite a lot of people reach out to us, I suppose, charities wanting to like present themselves to us. I think it brings the team together as well. So we're quite driven internally about making sure that, because obviously these are mine and Will's morals, right, and values. when we're hiring a PPC specialist or an SEO account manager, we try and make sure that or we try and hire people who also share those values. But how many really good SEO specialists or PPC specialists that are sustainably focused and also based here in Shrewsbury? It's not a massive amount of people. But what we can do internally is we kind of bring people on board and try and just make it a bit more of like a cultural thing within the company, on top of the 1% for the planet. So one of the kind of company benefits or employee benefits, we've recently gone through this whole process of improving our like employee benefits, and one of those is that every full-time employee for GrowRoom gets £1,000 per year to donate to a charity of their choice, and some of them might choose a 1% for the planet charity, and that's fine, that's great. Some of them might not, and that's fine as well. But I think initiatives like that we're kind of running internally within the company kind of get everyone on board, and whether or not they kind of have those values when they join the company, after a while of being here, I think they kind of they pick up on them and they see the mission and they get on board with the mission that we're trying to do.
Because it's so important to build a culture when you have a small business, and it's easy to fall into the trap of, I guess, hiring people that don't align with your values.
Yeah, and you don't want people to think, oh, they're giving all this money to charity, whereas actually, we should have a pay rise, or we should have this instead, or why are they doing that? You want people to kind of get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and we noticed you'd signed the Clean Creatives Pledge as well. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it was like one of the first things that we did when we set up the business, or as soon as we found out about the Clean Creatives, we kind of became a member ourselves, and it was always just a bit of a no-brainer for us that we'd align ourselves with that type of organization. The things that we have to do, or the things that they want organizations to do, such as not promoting, fossil fuel businesses or those that are doing harm to the environment. Like, well, that's what we wouldn't do that anyway. So our values kind of always aligned. Like the things that they want to see from organizations that are partnered with them are kind of things that we would be doing anyway. Like I said before, like turning away businesses that we wouldn't want to work with, and only working kind of exclusively with brands in the either environmental space or value driven space, or sometimes just those that are not even in that space but just trying to do something to be better, kind of align. Yeah, those values align. So from day one, it was always kind of, as soon as we found out about them, it was a no-brainer. We were going to become part of that.
So people often say digital is cleaner, but we know that it's not quite that simple. What are the hidden emissions behind digital marketing that most people never think about?
Yeah, cool. I could talk about this forever, and I do. So I mean, it's been really interesting. We've done quite a few events recently. The Blue Earth Summit in Woolwich in London a few weeks ago. I was at Kendal Mountain Festival a few weeks ago as well. And it's really interesting at those kind of events talking to people about this very subject. Because whenever I talk to people about like the carbon emissions of a website, they're usually like, what? Like even the sustainability managers who work in-house at big organizations, and I ask them about, they've been doing their B Corp certification, or they're doing their ESG reporting or things like that. And I'm like, what about your website's carbon emissions? And they're like, what do you mean? But obviously a website emits, has carbon emissions. Whenever you load any web page, that requires energy, right? And that energy's got to come from somewhere, and it's usually a data processing server wherever. And every time you load a web page, that data server has got to fire up, and that uses energy, right? And if that website is heavy in terms of the content on it, or the back-end code that's powering it, or if there's images and videos on that web page that aren't compressed, that's going to require more energy to load that page. And if the server that's firing it is using fossil fuels to power it, if it's not using renewable energy, that's going to use more energy to power it. And so every time you load any website ever, it's going to use energy. And there's certain things that we can do as digital marketing practitioners to reduce that amount of energy required, right? If you optimize a website, You can reduce the excess code in the back end that fires every time you load. You can compress image sizes. You can compress video files. You can use a green host, a green server to begin with that uses renewable energies to power their plants. All of those things are going to reduce the energy required to load a website. And then when you start talking to people about that, it's like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense, right? So they go from not even thinking about that as a thing to being like, oh yeah, it's obvious. But if you've got a website as well that's getting, hundreds of thousands of views every month, if you can reduce the carbon emissions per page load by even just like a small amount over the course of a month, if every time someone loads that web page, it's going to, I think the average is something like 2.4 grams of carbon per page load. And if that website's getting 100,000 views every month, that's like tons and tons every month, but every year, it adds up so quickly. So if you can reduce that by 1 gram or half a gram of carbon per page load, actually the amount that you can reduce over the course of months and years is huge. And we run our own, we've got a campaign that we run ourselves called the Green Web Project, and essentially this is what we do. So businesses come to us if they're thinking about this kind of thing, and we can work with them, and we take a benchmark of where their website is at in terms of how much carbon it uses, and then we can do work over a 3-6 month period or on an ongoing basis to reduce the carbon emissions or reduce the weight of that page, and then measure it again 6 months later or measure it on an ongoing basis. And quite quickly you can then see the impact that's having on the environment by reducing or optimizing a website, which is really, really cool. And there's not a lot of people in the digital marketing space really that are thinking about digital in that kind of way. Like there's lots of people optimizing websites, and there's lots of people, making websites more efficient or improving conversion rate of websites, but not necessarily like with the environmental side of it in mind. And obviously the other side of the coin to doing that. So that's great for the, for the planet, right? That's great for the environment. But for most financial directors or even marketing managers, that's not really a big enough drive for them to actually do anything about it. But obviously, if you do work to optimize a website which makes it more efficient and requires less energy and is therefore better for the planet, the other side of the coin to that is it's going to perform better. If it's got a faster loading time, it's going to convert more users into customers. And so actually the other side of that is it improves conversion rate, and that's going to improve revenue, and it's going to improve lead generation, and it's going to improve bottom line. So if the environmental side of it isn't a big enough factor to make someone want to start doing that kind of work, well, the fact that it's going to improve your bottom line, it's going to improve your revenue, should definitely be something that most businesses can get behind, right? So yeah, as I said, I can go on about this for ages. We also look at the environmental side of advertising. So my background is in paid media, and when we're working with brands on campaigns, we're thinking about what format those are going to be. Obviously, a video ad is going to use a lot more energy than an image ad, a static image, or even just a text-based ad. And are we excessively using video format where image or text would suffice? And looking at that side of things as well. So from an agency point of view, it's something that we're kind of constantly on top of. When we audit Google Ads accounts, for example, we have a standard Google Ads account audit checklist that we would follow, but we also look at it from a sustainable point of view. Again, ad formats, placements and things like that. Like, are you placing ads, display ads on unethical sources or places where you might not want your ads to show, that you wouldn't really consider if you weren't looking at it from an environmental or sustainable point of view. So yeah, there's so much that I can talk about in this side of things that I think a lot of people in the digital space aren't even really thinking about, which it's cool for us, right? Like I said, when we go to these events like Blue Earth or Kendall Mountain Festival, and we're talking to, whether it's prospective clients or if it's just talking in general to people about digital marketing and websites, and they start off by being like, what the hell? And then you're like, explain it, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Why aren't more people talking about this? And I'm like, I don't know. More people should be talking about this.
It's a bit of an abstract topic almost, because people just think their website is just some sort of magic thing that appears out of nowhere.
It's in,
But
it's in the cloud. It doesn't exist. It's not like a
yeah,
tangible thing that you can touch. So like, it doesn't, how can that require energy? It exists in the cloud, but obviously it requires energy. All digital stuff requires energy to load and to process. And once you start like talking about it, it becomes obvious, right?
I suppose for anyone listening, it's maybe like quite
Yeah.
low-hanging fruit as well,
Yeah.
for a
And if
business.
you're a B Corp or aspiring B Corp, it's with the new standards, it is becoming kind of mandatory that you start looking at that and looking at your website. You can't really just forget
Yeah.
about it anymore.
And on the subject of
Definitely, yeah.
how big the impact is, I can't remember the stat because I'm not like a numbers person. But we had another guest on, do you remember? And she was telling us about, I'm sure there's some crazy stat where it's like the internet or something is like a bigger carbon emitter than like the aviation industry or something.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
it.
Some
So
mad
there was a
stat,
study
yeah.
in
Oh, here we go,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So this was in like 2019. I can't remember who the study was done by, but there's a study in 2019, and basically it was the internet emits the equivalent amount of carbon or greenhouse gases as the aviation industry, which is like crazy. And this was in 2019 before like AI
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
development of all this stuff, which is so energy heavy, right? It's a stat I quote sometimes as well. So
What is this thing with like I hear this about like AI data centers using a lot of water as well as energy?
yeah, I mean, I'm not the most technical person, but I imagine it's cooling, right? It's cooling all.
Yeah.
They've got hundreds and thousands of machines in big warehouses in places, and they heat up and they need cooling. Um, but they're like crazy heavy on the amount of energy they require to process them. But also, yeah, like require cooling. Substantial amount of machines is just is a crazy
Mm.
amount of water and energy that's required to do that.
If there's anyone listening that's maybe got like a brand that they're trying to build or a product or an online offering, what's kind of what's normally like the easy wins that you would give them in terms of trying to, especially if it's like an impact brand, in a very crowded marketplace. Like what are the easy wins or easy advice you would give them to help them, I guess, get more exposure?
It could go quite in depth into this topic, and I'm not a business advisor. I'm a digital marketer, right? So I can only really address this from a digital point of view. I imagine there are loads of things businesses could do from a supply chain point of view, and if they're a retailer transporting goods and things like that. But I can only really comment from a digital point of view. But there's some really quick, easy wins and quick steps that everyone can and probably should be taking to be even just a slightly bit more green. The first one is using a green host for your website. Like that's whenever we're talking to people about this website carbon emission stuff, that's always the quick, easy win, the first step, because it requires no real time and energy from the business owner's point of view. Speak to your host, move it to a green one.
Do
If
you
your
have
host
any recommendations for one of those? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah, we work with a company called the Positive Internet Company. They've got their data centers are based down in I want to say like Cambridge or somewhere north of London area. My geography isn't great. Um, but yeah, we've been working with them, and I believe their data centers are all renewable energy powered. And yeah, it's just a really quick win. Even if you've got quite a small website, it's the first step that we always advise businesses on is move your website to a green host. And then from a marketing point of view as well, you know like I said before, not overloading your website with really heavy content. If you're going to put lots of videos and image files and things like that up onto the website, that's fine. I get people to be like, oh, but we've got a video in our header section, and I'm like, that's fine. It's not an issue. You don't need to. I'm not telling you to remove that, but make sure it's in a file that is compressed, so it's not using up loads and loads of energy. So it's just thinking about doing things in a bit of a smarter way, I suppose. And if you're going to be putting content out there, and if you're going to be running ad campaigns, or if you're going to be doing marketing in general, just think of the impact of that, not just from a commercial point of view, but from an environmental point of view, right? And actually, when you start to think about it, it becomes quite obvious. Don't run video ads if you don't need to run video ads. If image or text ads are going to suffice, then just do that.
How's the landscape changing as well? Because obviously, since you started in, was it 2022? I guess like SEO has always been big and paid ads, and that's your background. But now we've got like AI and a lot of people using AI and social media for search. So how is the world changing when it comes to marketing, and what advice have you got for people?
Yeah, I mean, the media landscape has changed completely in the last few years. Like the company launched in 2022, but I've been working in paid media for the best part of 10 years now. And back when I started, and you were running Google Ads, you had visibility on all of the information within the machine, right? So if you were bidding on keywords, you'd see every single keyword and search term, how many impressions, how many clicks they get in conversions and things like that, which obviously now we have very little visibility on that kind of information with ad types like Performance Max and AI Max and things like that now. The amount of visibility we have on what's actually going on within the machine has changed a lot. And I suppose it's changed what our role as practitioners really, really means, because the machine, we're now working with a machine that is essentially a black box, right? We don't know what's going on inside it, but automation and AI is going to bid. And the machine is going to bid and target what it thinks is the ideal audience for whoever the client is. And therefore, it's our job as practitioners to make sure that the key thing there is what the machine thinks is the ideal audience, right? And so that's the bit that we can control, right? By the data, by the things that we plug into the machine to teach it what the ideal customer is. And so rather than focusing on the details of keywords and things like that, it's more important now as practitioners that we're feeding information into the machine that is either Google or Meta or whatever platform it is that we're working on. That we're using, good data, and we're teaching the machine. The machine is learning based off good data that we're feeding it, and we're making sure that the outputs of that are then being fed back into the machine. The tests that we're doing are teaching, and the machine is learning off the tests that we're doing what the ideal customer is, and that's kind of how our job as practitioners has changed. It's more now about how we use the data and how we plug the data into the AI machine. AI has become such a buzzword recently. The landscape has changed over the last 5, 10 years, but more dramatically in the last year than ever before, right? AI has kind of completely taken over every aspect of all of our lives. So, yeah.
And do you think it's getting easier for brands or harder for brands to get new business online with all of this change that's going on?
I think it really depends on the space that they operate in, right? Some spaces are becoming more and more competitive. Retail where previously we could help small brands who had small budgets, and as long as what we were running for them, the ads that we were running were well set up, and the targeting was really on point, we could see really, really good results. But now we see a much more competitive landscape in most retail spaces. And so it's becoming harder and harder, I think, for small brands to get their voice heard in that mayhem of online retail. On the other end of the spectrum, we work with a kind of a local business to us that offers a very niche service. And because the content that we've created for them on their website kind of focuses on these really, really niche areas that there aren't a lot of other people focusing on, they've really quickly been able to gather, a lot of traction there. So yeah, I think it's a difficult one. It really depends on the space that the organization operates in. Some spaces are becoming a lot harder, whilst others, that are more niche might find that they're okay.
But the reason I was asking is so recently I put into ChatGPT. So we're in a pretty niche thing. And I put into like ChatGPT, who is the best supplier for reusing cardboard boxes in the UK? Thinking, oh, let's see how this thing works. And then it popped up and it was like, the best supplier is so and so. And I was like, that's not us. But the worst thing is that supplier had just gone bankrupt. And I was
I
like, why
really,
is it? They didn't even exist. They weren't even open anymore. And I was like, why is it the best supplier? And what's your source? And it showed me like a source from their website where it was like, we are the best supplier of cardboard boxes in the UK because blah blah blah. How if I'm a brand or a new brand and I'm trying to, especially in like the impact space, it's so competitive. Um, how do I not get around it, but how do I hack that?
It's a really interesting point, and we talk to clients about this very thing all the time. Like so many of our existing clients or new clients come to us, and they're like, "How do we get cited in ChatGPT?" And it just
Yeah.
seems to be something that everyone is talking about at the moment. But I think the important thing to remember is that ChatGPT is citing its information from the web, right? Whether it be Google and directly from the websites that it's finding that information, or from social media, is pulling that information from somewhere, right? I think we were chatting before, and I think he said that the most cited source of information in ChatGPT is Reddit, right? So ChatGPT is just going to pull that information from somewhere. So the role, for example, of SEO, everyone's talking about GEO and AIO and all these different acronyms that basically mean the same thing. It's still SEO. You're still optimizing content. And so that competitor that you just mentioned, obviously for the query that you typed into ChatGPT, they had the most relevant piece of content on their website, or that's what ChatGPT thought at least, and therefore it pulled that information and it presented it back to you. Really good opportunity for you guys to work on your website content and produce some content maybe around that very topic. And in 3 months down the line, you might find that ChatGPT is citing you guys' website instead of theirs. We have some really cool case studies recently of clients who have done that exact same thing on and created. I mentioned them before, like this really niche client local to us. They're a solicitor, a local solicitor to us, but they offer quite a specific niche type of family law. And so we've created website content for them. And this was like not even intentional, to be honest. This was just part of standard business as usual practice, creating content for them. We found a niche kind of offering that they did that there was reasonable amount of demand for, but not a lot of competition for. We're like, great, good opportunity. We'll create content around it. And we created a few blog articles. We created a transactional page on their website. We linked it all together. We might have done some digital PR for them. I can't remember. But we targeted this space that there was demand for, but not a lot of competition. And a few months later, we had the client coming back to us, and she was like, we've had a load of people find us on ChatGPT because they've typed in this specific thing, and we show up. And it's like, fantastic. That was it wasn't even the intention. The intention was just to target that niche in search, I suppose. But by doing that, by doing standard good SEO, which is just part of what we would operationally do for a client anyway, the benefit of that is they're now being cited in ChatGPT, which is really, really cool. So there is ways that we can kind of focus on that and focus on AI and making sure that we are being cited. But a lot of it boils down to just doing good SEO.
So SEO is actually becoming more important. So I kind of would have thought as a marketing noob, I would have thought that SEO would become less relevant because of things like ChatGPT. But
like the thing is with ChatGPT or other LLMs is it's just pulling that information from wherever it can find it, right, across the web. And I think it emphasizes the need for the brand messaging to be consistent across all the touch points that it can. So social media, for example, on the website, if you're running ads, wherever it might be that brand is visible, that the messaging is consistent. And if you're targeting a specific type of service or a specific type of product, that you're visible across all the touch points, and then you're more likely to be picked up by AI crawl bots as they're looking for sources.
I suppose with the Reddit thing, is that kind of like an element of social proof then? Is it, if lots of people are talking about this brand or this product, is that kind of what it's looking for?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, Reddit. You see Reddit listings on Google all the time. I think, and again, I'm not the SEO. My background is in paid media, so. But you see Reddit stuff more and more often on Google all the time, right? If I'm searching for, especially if it's like an informational, I'm researching something, I want to find something out. I'm not necessarily looking for a product or a service. I'm looking for information. Quite often the first thing I'll do is I'll Google it, but I'll look for the Reddit listings there, right? Because I then want to dive into the chat there and see everyone's feedback. And so it's definitely that kind of social proof, that conversational proof that you look for in places like Reddit, where, I might want to look at reviews for something, but I don't really want to look through review pages. I want to see actual reviews that people have put on Reddit.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I think it's having continuity across all of the digital landscape is going to help you perform better, both in just generic search, but also in in AI and LLMs.
What has been the hardest decision you've had to make as a mission-driven founder?
I don't really know. I mean, I was going to say, I don't think there's been like one single big, really hard decision that springs to mind. At least not yet. I'm sure there probably will be. I think it's a culmination of lots and lots of small, but also potentially quite hard decisions, right? Like I said before, turning away potential clients because they don't fit the bill of what we like, the organizations that we like to work with. That's quite a hard decision, especially at the time when you're like, there's revenue there, we could be making more money, but actually no, we're going to say no to that and stick to our values. So that's potentially a smaller, harder decision that we make on a regular basis. But I think more in general, from a sustainability point of view or from an environmental point of view, if you are environmentally focused, or if you understand that there is an environmental crisis going on, then just generally in day-to-day life, you are making the harder decision quite often. For example, I might cycle to work instead of drive, right? It would be more convenient for me to drive. And especially when it's raining, or I'm really tired and it's late, it's dark now at like 5 p.m., 4 p.m., and I don't really want to cycle home in the dark. It's a harder decision to make, to cycle to work instead of driving to work, right? But it's the more environmental decision to make. And I think the same is true there. Or, if it comes to like recycling, or not buying things that you don't need, just make the decision to live with, I don't know, if you've got clothing that has, a bit of a rip in it, but you just sew it up. You don't really need to go out and buy a whole new wardrobe. You could just use what you've currently got. And I think that's the more important thing than, there's not just like one really big, hard decision that's going to make us more environmentally friendly. I think it's just lots of little decisions that kind of all add up, and that's, I think, what from a sustainable point of view, everyone can kind of do. It's more about the lots of smaller decisions than any one big one. In some ways, most decisions you make are hard. Yeah, just like daily daily decisions that better the workforce as well, like making decisions that are going to improve the lives of staff as well.
I was talking to someone the other day about a bit about this, and was kind of saying like, if you run a business, you actually don't need to be very good at it, because it's like you just make so many changes and decisions. Whereas if you're like brain surgeon, it's really important that you make the right decision when you're operating on someone.
I mean, I found the last year especially, such a journey in being a business owner. So it went from obviously just me and Will in the business when we started in 2022. There's now a core team of 14 of us, right? 6 of those are based from our head office here in Shrewsbury. And the majority of that growth has come over like the last 12 months. So for the first year, it was just me and Will in the business. And I've gone from being the PPC guy, the guy managing all of our PPC clients, all of our paid media clients. Like I said, my background is in running Google Ads. That's kind of what I've done. I don't do that anymore. That's not my job, and that's been the strangest thing ever. We've hired people to do that, so we've got a really good PPC team, a really good paid media team who handle all of that, from the account implementations, campaign development, and running the campaigns, client management, and reporting back to them. And in the last year, my job has been changed from being the guy who's doing all the paid media stuff to now, well, going from that to managing a team of paid media people. But now I've hired a head of paid media. I don't even manage the team anymore. I'm just basically like the admin and HR and accounts and business operations guy. So yeah, it's been a crazy kind of like last few years for us, moving through that process of being actually delivering, client deliverables and results, to just kind of working in an operational role.
Yeah, I wondered. So before our final question, if there's anyone listening that is, like I said, trying to build an impact brand, if you could give them just one piece of advice.
I mean, if you're starting from absolute scratch, just make sure that there's actually demand for what you're trying to do, right? The problem that I find with a lot of brands who are trying to do something impactful is the financial side of things, right? So a lot of organizations in this space, and I think it comes from like the people who have these values and want to do something good for the world. We're focused on giving back, right? And therefore, quite often I speak to people, founders and stuff, and like they're not paying themselves all of their money is either being donated to charity, or it's paying staff, or it's paying for this and that in the business. And it's like the changes that we need to see from an environmental point of view need to make good financial sense, right? If they don't make good financial sense, they're not going to last. They're going to crumble, and no one's going to get behind them, and it's not going to work. So the good environmental choice is also or has to be the right financial choice as well. Make sure that there's demand for it first, because there's no point starting a business or a brand or a clothing company or a product, whatever, if people don't want it. But also, you need your financials to work. It's great having all the desire to do something really, really good, but it's not going to help anyone if you're not paying yourself, if you're not able to sustain it. So I don't know if that actually answers the question at all, but make sure it's a viable business proposition. Make sure that it can be financially beneficial for you and your team, and for the company, because I see it time and time again where there's founders who have a really great idea, and they want to give loads back, and they want to build a brand or a product or something because it is the green choice. But unless it's the better financial choice as well, it's not going to work, and you're not going to be able to deliver on what you actually set out to do in the first place, which is get back.
I think it's good advice. I think the simple things are often missed, especially in the impact sector. People are often so passionate about stuff, so sometimes they're able to look past the important basics.
Yeah. It's like the whole 1% thing. Like, you don't have to start necessarily with joining 1%. You can just give what you can to a charity, can't you? It doesn't have to be that big of a commitment.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, like you said earlier, just the principle, I think, is very effective and will help to make it snowball. Yeah, okay. So our final question then. So I want you to imagine that it's 10 years in the future and we're inviting you back onto the Earth Your Wild podcast. Where would you like the world to be, and how have you helped create that?
Yeah, I really struggle with this one. But I think, without going into like too deep of a hole, I think, just to put it quite simply, a move from divisive politics to politics that is inclusive, where subjects like the environment and social justice are given priority, where corporations are accountable for their actions, which is kind of what we're trying to build our organization in the vision of, and what we kind of hope more businesses try and do. There's a huge gap in most companies between the lowest and highest paid employee, and we're trying to that's not the case in our organization. There's actually only a very small difference between our lowest and highest paid employees. A world where everyone is given more than just the bare minimum in terms of health, support, time, mentoring, work-life balance. And that's kind of what we're trying to build at GrowRoom. We have an actual 4-day work week, so most of the team work Monday to Thursday. Like 28 hours a week is full time for us. No one works more than 28 hours a week. We offer kind of things like life insurance and enhanced sick pay and enhanced benefits and things like that. But for us, it's just being mindful and kind, and thinking, well, that's what I would like to receive if I was an employee. So yeah, small businesses being mindful about the social and environmental side of running a business, not just always focused on the money.
Thanks, Sam. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I could talk forever about carbon emissions of digital marketing and making websites more efficient, but I don't want to bore you too much with it. So yeah, no, I really appreciate the time and going, inviting me on and going through this stuff. I think it's a really interesting point of view. I think, more and more business are definitely thinking about this, thinking about how they can be sustainable and how they can be environmental. We see that with the amount of businesses becoming B Corp certified, for example, and I think that's really obviously a great thing. If that's backed by politics and government, then I think we can make some real change. So hopefully that's the direction that we head in over the next 10 years.
Hopefully. And if there's anyone listening that would like any help with their marketing or reducing the carbon footprint of their website, where do they find you guys?
I mean, our website is growroom.agency. Go online, have a look at the stuff that we do on there. We've got lots of case studies and you can see how we work and what we do. Me and Will are quite active on LinkedIn as well, so go and give us a follow on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. We hope it was truly
Earth your while.
For more information, visit reuserbox.co.uk/earthyourwhile.
And if you'd like to appear on the next series of Earth Your While, please email media@reuserbox.co.uk.